Welcome, welcome, welcome. These are the first videos I'm recording in 2024, and my question is, am I the only YouTuber left who isn't letting ChatGPT write my scripts? Don't get me wrong, it's my little research assistant, but these scripts are written by good old organic matter, listening to ambient music to deliver some powwow wisdom for all you marketers out there. So, today I'm going to run through a fun topic that's always bubbling around our industry and product, marketing, and growth, and that is good old A/B testing. I'll cover what A/B testing actually is, give you a real-world example of an A/B test from our website using Optimizely, and also talk through the limitations of A/B testing because, spoiler alert, I don't think they're a silver bullet. What is A/B testing? Definition and overview. First things first, an A/B test is where you test one thing, thing A, against another thing, thing B, by exposing a group of people to thing A and a group of people to thing B, to see which one has the desired effect that you're aiming for each thing to have. That's a lot of things. Let me use a super common example to demonstrate. Let's say you navigate to a homepage of a software company website selling a marketing data hub. Yes, that's our website. I'll use ours because then it's a real world example. In the header, we're running an A/B test to figure out if image A, which is of a happy customer holding a funnel in their hand, or image B, which is actually a video explaining funnel, will lead to more people clicking on our book a demo button. Image A is thing A and image B is thing B, and we've decided to split the A/B test 50-50. Now, just because it's an A/B test doesn't mean it must be a 50-50 split. Depending on how quickly you want to achieve results or how much the appetite for risk is, you can split it any way you want. But in this case, it means 50% of their web visitors will get to see image A and 50% will see image B. This split is important for later because depending on the size of the effect depends on the volume required. Hopefully that quick explanation covers what an A/B test actually is. Why then is A/B testing important for marketers? Well, let's stick with our homepage example. Without A/B testing, we could be sat in a meeting discussing how we can change the homepage to book more meetings. Then someone could say, well, I think we should have the image of someone holding a funnel, and the other might say, no, I think we should have a video. Then we'd probably talk and come to a conclusion, change the website, and hope for an improvement in the numbers. Not to mention the fact that an improvement in the numbers could be down to the change we made, or it could be down to other factors like the economy picking up or seasonality, meaning you don't really learn anything to take into your next optimization meeting. So you repeat the same thing again and again and again, never really learning anything, just throwing shit at the wall and hoping it sticks type of thing. Key components of A/B testing. So we know A/B testing is important, but what else do you need to know in order to get up and running with your first A/B tests? Control group. In an A/B test, the control group is the segment of the audience that experiences the original version of the variable being tested, serving as a benchmark to measure the effectiveness of the new variation. The A through which you can see the impact of the B. Hypothesis. It's super important to have a hypothesis going into an A/B test so you can understand whether or not the A/B test was successful, unsuccessful, or had no impact. For example, my hypothesis in the first example could be, I believe that changing the image in the header to a video explaining funnel will have a 30% increase in meetings booked. Note, the 30%, or rather the size of the effect, is super important for later on when I talk about statistical significance in A/B testing. Metrics. Understanding which metrics you're trying to affect ties into the hypothesis, but you really need to have a good handle on those metrics and ensure they're actually measurable. Choosing the right metrics to move is crucial to the success of an A/B test. Yes, it might be easiest to measure button clicks, but if button clicks don't lead to business outcomes, then you might have to choose something more difficult to measure. Not that it would make an A/B test invalid if it doesn't move business outcomes, but it also doesn't seem like the best use of everyone's time because what are we trying to do here? A/B testing versus multivariate testing. Just a quick note here on the difference between A/B testing and multivariate testing, because they often get mixed up or talked about as one and the same. Well, that's because they kind of are. A/B testing is simply a type of multivariate testing where there's only one independent variable. A/B testing example. Okay, so I gave you a hypothetical example of an A/B test that we could run on our homepage. But websites are not the only place you can run A/B tests. They're just a really easy and familiar example since we've all been on a website before. But the reality is that A/B testing can be deployed across different parts of the business, like email marketing, where you can change subject lines to increase open rates, product pricing and promotions by trying promotional offers to see which are more effective in driving sales, advertising and marketing campaigns such as ad copy variations to improve click-through rates, or app interfaces by testing out different onboarding processes to reduce user drop-off. Again, because it's the familiar, I'll walk you through a real example of a successful A/B test that we run on our website. I want to note first that we use a tool called Optimizely for our A/B testing. We've previously done some A/B testing in HubSpot, which can be good, but we felt like we wanted to up our CRO game and actually get a tool built for the job. But depending on your volumes and the size of the opportunity you have for CRO will depend whether an investment in an A/B testing tool is, well, actually worth it for you. So, onto our A/B test. We used to use HubSpot's own booking flow for when prospects wanted to book a meeting with our sales team. Now, meetings are crucial to our business because that's how we show the value of funnel to prospects to convince them to become customers. But the issue we had was that the HubSpot booking flow was inflexible. We couldn't optimize it in any way. For example, if we wanted to add a picture of a dog next to the flow to make people feel nice and calm during the booking flow, well, we couldn't, because the entire flow is hard-coded. So we developed our own booking flow with the optimizations we had in mind. Sorry, there was no dog. And A/B tested it to see if it has a positive effect on our desired metric. The hypothesis was then designing our own booking flow will improve the conversion rate from starting the booking flow to finishing the booking flow by 15%. The metric was then conversion rate from booking flow started to booking flow finished. And the control group was 50% of people who start the booking flow got the HubSpot booking flow, and the variant was 50% of the people went into the new booking flow. Now, one extra thing to throw at you here is the baseline conversion rate. This starts to get a little bit technical, but will hopefully make sense later when I talk about statistical significance. But essentially, depending what the baseline conversion rate is of the control group will determine the size of the sample size actually needed. Interpreting results. So I'm in Optimizely here, and you can see the date range and the segment. Then if I scroll down, you can see the name of the experiment, which is the booking flow experiment. Then we look at the numbers and see the number of conversion visitors to the control and the variant. As you can see, our baseline conversion rate was up at 54%, and we wanted a 15% increase, which means we needed a smaller sample size than if it was 10% and wanted a 15% increase. Then you see the increase in conversion rate, which was actually almost 20%, so higher than what we hypothesized. And finally, you have the statistical significance of 98%, so the platform is almost certain that the effect we see is due to the change we made. The limitations of A/B testing. Now, onto the part of the video where I get all opinionated and go from showing to telling, based on my experience in marketing, product, and growth. Statistical significance. I alluded to the first and arguably biggest limitation with A/B testing earlier, and that is statistical significance, or rather reaching it. Statistical significance is when the p-value of our statistical test is below a predefined threshold. The p-value quantifies the probability of observing an effect at least as extreme as the one we've seen under the hypothesis that there is no difference. That's a nice, tight science explanation, but let me try and explain it in a simpler way. When you establish a control, you assert that the control is true. Then you hypothesize that you expect to see a change relative to that control. Statistical significance then is being able to see that the change relative to the control is because of the change you made and not random chance. And that's the important thing to know as a marketer. Because of way too many variables to list here, if you don't run an A/B test correctly, then the results you're looking at could be random, or they could be due to the change you made, but you actually can't be sure of it. One example here that could be responsible for the effect if you don't reach statistical significance could be that far more of the people who go into one of the variants happen to be right in the center of your ICP, whereas the other variant just happened to get a lot of people that aren't quite your ICP, causing one variant to perform much better, but not necessarily due to the change you made. Let's look at statistical significance through some scenarios of our website image versus video example. Scenario A. 2 weeks, 1,000 website visitors, 500 see the control, and 500 see the variant. Variant B has a 2% increase in conversion rate and a baseline conversion rate of 10%. Scenario B. 2 weeks, 1 million website visitors, 500,000 see the control A, and 500,000 see the variant B. Variant B has a 2% increase in conversion rate, and again, we have a baseline conversion rate of 10%. Scenario C. 2 weeks, 1,000 website visitors, 500 see the control A and 500 see the variant B. Variant B has a 35% increase in conversion rate and a baseline conversion rate of 10%. With scenario A, there is a low volume during the 2 weeks and a low impact, meaning the 2% increase in conversion rate would not be statistically significant. Essentially meaning either the difference is due to random fluctuations or there is a real difference, but you can't see it. With scenario B, there is a lot of volume during the 2 weeks. So even though the increase is only 2%, it is likely to have statistical significance because the volume allows you to see statistically the small effect that you've achieved. With scenario C, there is also low volume like the first example, but also a really big percentage impact. Meaning even though there is less volume, the size of the impact allows you to see that the change you made was the reason for the effect. Okay, I have an analogy to help you out, courtesy of our statistics expert here at Funnel, who actually has a PhD, so no messing around here. Think about it like this. You want to see if there is an animal crawling around on the moon. If the expected animal is an elephant, big effect, you only need a pair of binoculars, small sample size, to see it. If the expected animal is an ant, you need a telescope, big sample size. However, whether or not there actually is an animal crawling around on the moon is independent of your choice of binoculars or a telescope. Same here. A small expected effect requires a large sample size to be detectable, but whether or not the effect is there is independent of the sample size that you choose. A/B tests can slow you down. Yes, A/B tests give you answers to specific questions and allow you to see the effect of the changes you make, and they allow you to learn more and work with your marketing in a more scientific way. With that said, the actions you take as a result of your A/B test will determine whether it's worth doing. For example, let's say you want to roll out an entirely new branding and you spent a lot of time, money, and energy on building your new brand. You could decide to A/B test as you roll out your new branding. But here's my spicy 2 cents from experience. Firstly, designing an experiment to isolate the new branding's effect on your key metrics is tough because a new branding isn't a small optimization and it isn't that concrete. Secondly, and most importantly, even if the new branding has a negative impact, you're probably not going to roll it back. You're probably going to roll it out because you and many others in your company believe it's a better long-term brand. Then you'll optimize it until it's at least equal or outperforming your previous branding. This is what I mean by slowing you down. If you already know what your action will be, regardless of the result of the A/B test, then why waste time testing it? Instead, move quickly with conviction, which comes with more risk, but then work towards what you see as a higher ceiling than the thing you're replacing, and sprinkle in A/B tests along the way to optimize your new thing that you got with conviction. So what does this limitation mean in practice? Well, as I discussed, A/B testing is one of the answers to this opinion versus that opinion, and to be able to optimize and learn. However, as I just mentioned, A/B testing requires either a lot of volume and/or a big expected impact, and/or a high baseline conversion rate in order to garner quick results. Otherwise, you'd be running an A/B test for weeks or months on end in order to be sure of its results. Just because you don't have tons of volume doesn't mean you can't do qualitative split testing and expose different segments of users to different variations of your product, website, or marketing, and use qualitative measures to understand how users interact with those variations. But the important thing is not to conflate qualitative analysis with quantitative statistically significant results. i.e., you can't statistically attribute any changes in metrics to the change you made, but it doesn't mean there isn't a difference. That was me talking all about A/B testing. I hope you learned a lot and can now either run them yourself or more easily discuss your hypotheses with the data teams who run them with you. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe, or you'll learn more about digital marketing, marketing data and analytics, and data visualization tips and tricks. All the great content you need to shortcut your way to being a better marketer.